Namaskar. It's a real honor and privilege to be interacting with the students of IIT Gandhinagar. I'm really grateful to Professor Michel Denino, Mana Shah, Ankita Nair, and Arya Adityan for facilitating this. As Michel said, for the last several years, I have been engaged in a study of identifying certain key facets of the Indian civilizational heritage that have survived over the millennium despite all the disruptions that have taken place in the political life of this country. And one of the most important facets of this culture and civilization is the centrality of image worship and the importance of sacred sites. I'm not by any means suggesting that other forms of worship did not prevail, but I think I'll not be wrong in saying that a large section of the populace of the subcontinent has engaged in image worship and recognized the importance of sacred sites over the millennium. So, one facet of this civilization, which has continued over the millennium, is the importance of image worship and the importance of sacred sites. Now, it is very interesting that the early Vedic literature makes no reference to Murti Puja, image worship. It refers to appeasing gods or propitiating gods through sacred fires. So we have Indra, Agni, Soma, they're all associated with sacred fires. Now, when does this begin to change? We have a very important account by an early Sanskrit grammarian. His name is Yaska. And in the 6th, 5th century BC, he wrote a text, Nirukta, which is available to us even now. And this text contains a very important passage which I would like to bring to your notice. Now, he talks about the forms of gods, and he says that now we will discuss the forms of gods. Akar, Chintanam, Devatanam. Some say the gods resemble human beings, and others say they do not resemble human beings. So, this discussion goes on in his text, which means that at the time of Yaska, the Vedic gods had not been bestowed with human form, which they acquired in later literature, particularly the epics and Purans. So, when do the images originate? The first evidence that we have of images are from the Indus Valley Harappan civilization. Now, in Mohenjo-daro, we come across a small number of stone statues. The most famous of them is known as the Priest King. Now, these statues have certain distinct features. They have the face, neck, and chest in a stiff posture and the half-closed eyes looking pointedly at the tip of the nose. Now, there is a very important archaeologist and historian, R.P. Chanda. He was the founder of the Virendra Research Museum, which is now in Bangladesh. And he is the first person to point out that this posture of these images remains a distinct feature of subsequent images made in this Indian subcontinent, but he says it is not found anywhere outside India. So, the noted historian, art historian, Stella Cranbridge, she also noted the dignity of these figures. She says they were characterized by an attitude of concentration with yoga glance and the corresponding fixation of the mind. So, how do we explain the origin of images? The clue is provided in the last verse of the Shwet Avshatara Upanishad. And it says that here we find the first mention of the word bhakti. The word bhakti is not found in earlier literature, and it is first found over here. And when it talks about bhakti, what does it say? It says bhakti is deep affection and mystic devotion for a personal deity who is the object of worship, that is puja. So the practice of image worship is closely linked to the idea of bhakti. As the sacrificial fire used to carry the sacrificer's oblations to the deity, so also the murti carried the bhakti, the devotion of the devotee to the god. And the last act of puja was of critical importance in the evolution of icons or murtis. The author of the Sukta Niti Sar says that the image maker should make the images in such a manner that they contribute to the success of Dhyan Yoga. Now, after these images at the Indus Mohenjo-daro civilization, we encounter images almost 3 millennium later, principally in the two cities of Mathura and Gandhara. Now, certain questions arise. First of all, why do we encounter images mainly of Buddha and the Jain Tirthankars in Mathura and Gandhara when the birthplace of these religions is Eastern India? So, why do we find images over here? And the other surprising thing is that the images which we find in Mathura and Gandhara are very similar to those that we have seen in the Indus Valley civilization. Now, there is no archaeological evidence that we have found so far that can help us bridge the gap between the Indus Valley civilization and the beginning of images in Mathura and Gandhara in the 1st century Common Era. There is no archaeological evidence, but literary evidence does help us to provide some explanation. Now, scholars who have studied this, they have said that the Hindu concept of divine was modeled on the yogi, the ascetic. In Sanskrit texts, dhyan and yoga are synonymous. Dhyan or yoga must be performed in certain rigid postures called asanas. So we have this definition in an early Upanishad, and I just read out to you. If a wise man hold his body with 3 erect parts, that is chest, neck, and head, if he holds his body in 3 erect parts even and turn his senses with the mind towards the heart, he will then in a boat of Brahman cross all the torrents which causes fear. Compressing his breathings, let him who has subdued all motions breathe forth through the nose with gentle breath. So this is, let the wise man without fail restrain his mind, that chariots yoked with vicious horses. Now, similar descriptions of the Dhyan Yoga are found in the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, and the early Buddhist texts. All these texts attest that Dhyan Yoga was practiced by ascetics of different sects as early as the 6th century BCE. That reduces the gap by almost 600 years between Mohenjo-daro and the first images that we find. That still leaves about 2 millennium to be accounted for. Now, scholars of Indian religion and philosophy, they have suggested that Dhyan Yoga itself included primitive elements that went back to an earlier stage than the one represented in the early Upanishads and early Buddhist texts. So they say, like Vedic sacrifices, Dhyan Yoga was probably originally practiced. Dhyan Yoga was probably originally practiced to acquire worldly objects and miraculous powers, because the Vedic sacrifices were all for attaining goods for this world. But what happens is that there's a great change in the spiritual outlook of people with the advent of the doctrines of karma and rebirth. So, as Vedic sacrifices were no longer regarded as suitable, so Dhyan Yoga, instead of being viewed as a means of acquiring perfect knowledge, so Dhyan Yoga began to be used for acquiring perfect knowledge that could lead to the emancipation from the cycle of rebirths. So, just to briefly recapitulate, Vedic sacrifices were done for worldly goods. So, according to scholars, Dhyan Yoga was also practiced for acquiring worldly success. But with the spread of the doctrine of karma and rebirth, Vedic sacrifices were not regarded as suitable for these new ideals. So also Dhyan Yoga began to be used for, lost its earlier objective of acquiring worldly wealth and began to be used for acquiring salvation, freedom from birth and rebirth. So now, to answer the question, why were images found in Mathura and Gandhara? It is because Mathura and Gandhara were two important centers of the Indus Valley civilization. So how this tradition of image worship survived over the millennium is something that really needs to be investigated. Now, we have a lot of early references to image worship in the texts that are available to us. The Mahabharata, for example, mentions image worship, and it talks about the importance of sacred sites, tirths. And it says that if a person goes on a tirth or a pilgrimage to these sacred sites, he will acquire more fruits than you obtain by performing Vedic sacrifices like Ashwamedh, Rajasuya, etc. Now, the grammarian Panini, who is the author of the Ashtadhyayi, he in Sutra 5399 provides information on images of deities in his time. Patanjali, who wrote a commentary on Panini, he mentions Shiv, Skand, and Vishakha as deities whose images were being made for worship in his time. He also says that the rulers of the Mauryan dynasty used to sell images to replenish the royal treasury. So that means that image worship was being practiced by a substantial section of the Mauryan population as per the statement of Patanjali. The Manu Smriti has several references to image worship. It talks of Devatam, images of gods. They must be circumambulated. One should not step over the shadow of an image of a god. And at festivals, ceremonies, and auspicious occasions, one should go to images for protection. And the Manu Smriti also says that whoever destroys the flag of a temple or desecrates an image, he should repair the whole and be made to pay a fine. The Arthashastra also has numerous references to images. It talks of Chaitya Devta, the deity in a sanctuary of a temple. Devta Graha, that is a temple. Devta Pratima. So all these image references, it has so many of them. And he talks about worship of images. How do you worship an image? You prostrate before the image and you bring uphar, gift to the deity, particularly flowers and incense. And he talks about, the Arthashastra talks about Kul deity, that is the family deity, the deity of an area. So the Nagar deity, so it has copious references to images. And it also mentions temples and properties of temples. The properties of temples include cattle, grain, and it says that it is the duty of the village elders, Grama Vradha, to protect the temple property and ensure that the temple property goes on growing. Now, the earliest images that we have found, I told you that there were Jain images at Mathura. There is a very famous site, Kankali Tila. It was excavated in the 19th century, and many images were found. Now, the important thing to note is that the images of the three religions, three streams that we call today as Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism, they are all found in this area. It's difficult to say which is the earliest because there's hardly a gap of a few decades. And what is important is that there seem to have been communities of craftsmen who were living in that area and whose services were available to the followers of these three streams. So, among the images that we find at Kankali Tila are two seated images of Rishabdev, who's the first Tirthankar. And since this place was badly devastated or ravaged, we have found only small fragments of inscriptions. But these inscriptions are very, very valuable because they show us that wide sections of society were involved in the worship of images and in the sponsoring of shrines. So we have found certain inscriptions and they tell us who were the donors. And it's very interesting to find who are the people who made donations. The donors included a layman who donated an arch for a temple, a laywoman who donated a temple, a courtesan and her entire household who donated a Jinnah shrine, and a woman who installed an image of Mahavir in a Jain temple. So these four inscriptions that we have found over there indicated the existence of Jain shrines and Jain images. Now we come to the early Buddhist images, which have also come from Mathura. It is not that Buddhist stupas were not erected. Buddhist stupas were certainly erected before the 1st century AD, Common Era, as in Sanchi, Bharut, etc. Now, in all the early construction that was done in these stupas, the Buddha was never represented in human form. He was always represented by symbols, either his feet or, Bodhi tree where he attained enlightenment. So he was represented by symbolic representation of certain important instances that happened in his life. So the first image of the Buddha that we have found is from a place called Isapur, and it is called the Isapur Buddha. And it is absolutely amazing that the Isapur Buddha, his upper garment is draped exactly in the same manner as the priest king of Mohenjo-daro. And in subsequent images also of the Buddha, the drapery is over the left shoulder under the right arm. So this is something that we have to note, and tried to find an answer for. Now, to come to the third important deity that I want to discuss, and that is Vishnu. It is very interesting. Vishnu means, I mean, Vasudev Krishna. It is very interesting that the first evidence that we have of the worship of Vasudev Krishna is by Megasthenes, who is the Greek ambassador to the court of the Mauryan king Chandragupta. Megasthenes wrote a book, Indica. Most of it has not survived, but parts of it are available in the writings of Aryan and others historians of that time. Now, Megasthenes says that the followers of Vasudev Krishna are very dominant in the two cities of Mathura and Gokul. And he says, so this is an eyewitness account because Megasthenes came to India and wrote about what he saw. Then there is a Roman historian of the 1st century Common Era. His name is Quintinus Curtius. He wrote histories of Alexander the Great, and he recorded that when the army of Porus was marching against Alexander, it carried an image of Krishna before it because that was the strongest motivation for the soldiers to fight the enemy, that is Alexander. The oldest surviving pictorial representation of Sankarshan, Balram, Sankarshan is Balram, Vasudev Krishna's elder brother, and Vasudev are 6 coins that are dated to the rule of an Indo-Greek king, Agathocles, who ruled around 170 BCE. Now, in 1970, excavations on the Afghanistan-Russian border, they revealed 6 coins. So 6 coins of 170 BC. And the coins are very interesting because they have the Greek inscription on one side and the inscription on Brahmi on the other side. So on one side, we have a person with a club and a plow. Those are the symbols of Balram. On the other side, we have a person with the conch shell and wheel, which are the symbols associated with Vasudev Krishna. So first pictorial representation is of these coins. But the first epigraphic evidence that we have is of very, very great significance. And it's a real marvel that it has survived so long because it has been so useful and so helpful to us in reconstructing the history of the worship of Vasudev Krishna. This is an inscription which can still be seen in the ancient city of Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh. This inscription dates to the 2nd century BCE. It is by a Greek ambassador to a Sunga king. His name is Heliodorus, and he comes to Kashiputra Bhagbhadra, who has been identified as the 5th king of the Sunga dynasty. Now, this site, it remained such an important site. Alexander Cunningham, the great archaeologist, visited it twice, and he has written his detailed report, and he says that it's amazing that this site is still under worship. So a pillar that was erected in the 2nd century BC, Cunningham finds that it is still under worship, and he says that the pillar is thickly smeared with what he calls red lead. And he notices that apart from this pillar, which we call the Garud Dhwaj pillar, he says nearby, I found the capitals of other columns. So he notices three capitals that he finds. One is the palm capital, the other is the crocodile capital, and then the Kalp drum capital. So he says that these capitals are lying nearby the Heliodorus column. Then the site, it attracted other archaeologists, H. Lake and John Marshall. When John Marshall wrote his report, he said that generation after generation have come to worship at the spot and they're still continuing. Now, in the early 20th century, the noted archaeologist and epigraphist D.R. Bhandarkar, he carried out excavations at Besnagar, and he said that this was a very important center. Vidisha was a very important center, and there would have been several temples in honor of Vasudev Krishna. And Heliodorus, coming from Taxila, erected the column in front of what was the most important temple. Bhandarkar's excavations showed that that pillar was standing at its original site. It had not been disturbed or relocated over the centuries. And he found that he started excavating where could the temple have been. So his excavation showed him that the temple was located at a site where the priest of the temple was living. So that site of the temple had been occupied by the house of a priest living in that area. And he found certain coins over there which showed that the temple was in use till the mid 6th century. And on one of the pillars, he found the names of people who had come and engraved their names on that pillar. So he says it's possible that the temple was under worship for a century more. Now, to come to this Garud pillar inscription of Heliodorus, the inscription on that pillar is in two parts. So part one tells us about the king whose ambassador he is and the Indian king to whose court he has come and the details. And the second part of the inscription is very interesting. It is almost verbatim a reproduction of a verse from the Sri Parv of the Mahabharata. So, are we to conclude that Heliodorus was familiar with the Mahabharata before he came to India? The answer to this question is found in the Mahabharata itself. The Mahabharata says that the composer of the Mahabharata, Vyas, directed that the Mahabharata be first recited in Taxila. So this is a very rare instance where we have the literary text substantiating what we find on the ground by way of an inscription. Now, it's very interesting that Panini, his work Ashtadhyayi, contains among the earliest references to the Mahabharata. So, Panini lived in a place not far from Taxila, and Panini's testimony shows that the Mahabharata was known to the people of Gandhar well before the time of Heliodorus. And in Sutra 4398, Panini refers to Vasudev as Devta Vishesh. Devta Vishesh. Now, Patanjali, he lived around the same time as Heliodorus, and he explained what Panini said when he used the word Devta Vishesh. He said Devta Vishesh means that this person was not a Kshatriya, but the god of gods. Now, why does Patanjali say that Devta Vishesh means that this person was not a Kshatriya but the god of gods? Because there are scholars like D.C. Sarkar and R.G. Bandharkar and several others who say that originally Krishna Vasudev, the son of Devki, mentioned in the Chandogya Upanishad, was a human hero. And they say that he got deified over a period of time. And that is why Patanjali is saying, he's clarifying that Devta Vishesh is god of gods, he's the adorable one, he is not a Kshatriya. So, according to Bhandarkar and other scholars, by this time the deification of a human hero who was a Kshatriya had taken place. Now, the relationship between Garud, why is it the Garud Dhwaj that Heliodorus erected? Why did he choose Garud? Now, the Mahabharata explains the relationship between Garud and Vishnu. It says that Vishnu had given Garud two boons. And in return, Garud said, I also give you a boon. So Vishnu said that may you be my carrier always. So this means that by the time latest, when Heliodorus erected his column, the identification of Vasudev Krishna with Vishnu had taken place. Now, it is very interesting that besides the Heliodorus pillar inscription, we have other epigraphic evidence from that region which talks about other temples in honor of Vasudev. And there is an inscription that we have found in Brahmi of the late 2nd century BCE. And it records, and I'm quoting, this Garud column of the excellent temple of the Bhagavat was erected by Gautami Putra, a Bhagavat, in the 12th year of the installation of Maharaja Bhagavat. Now, this Maharaja Bhagavat is the second last king of the same Sunga dynasty, of which Heliodorus had also. So that means that this is further illustration, further confirmation of Vidisha being a very important site. And I mentioned that Cunningham had found other columns like the Tal Dhwaj and the Makar Dhwaj. The Tal Dhwaj is associated with Krishna's elder brother and the Makar Dhwaj with Krishna's son. So these columns, they confirm that some important members of the Vrishni clan to which Krishna belonged were being worshipped at this site, and we have found columns and inscriptions which substantiate it. Now, the most important excavations at Besnagar were done in the 1960s by M.D. Khare of the Archaeological Survey of India. And he found traces of an elliptical structure adjacent to the Heliodorus pillar, and he found that this structure dated to the 3rd, 4th century BCE. Nothing of that structure has survived. Most likely it was made of wood. And after it was damaged by floods, another temple was constructed on a raised platform. Now, Khare's excavations showed that there were 8 pillars in front of the Vasudev temple of the 2nd century BCE. 6 of them were in alignment with the Heliodorus pillar, and the 7th was in front of the central pillar. Now, all these pillars, they showed that this area had temples or shrines in honor of the 5 Vrishni heroes. Now, this is as far as Vidisha is concerned, but it is surprising that almost of the same period, we find further evidence of Vasudev, Krishna or Vishnu worship in near Chittor. This is a place Nagri, it's near Chittor. And here we again find a fragment of an inscription. So what is interesting for any student of Indian history is how fragments of inscriptions that are found accidentally or by planned archaeological excavations have helped us to get a glimpse of what was the evolution of Indian religious traditions at this time. Now, in 1904, the archaeologist D.R. Bhandarkar, he excavated at this site and he found a portion of an inscription stuck inside the entrance of a step well. Now, this inscription recorded the erection of a worship stone enclosure. This is what it says, worship stone enclosure. What does worship stone enclosure mean? It means a stone enclosure around an object of worship to distinguish it from surrounding enclosures like a house, a residential building, etc. The site on which he found the worship stone enclosure was called Narayan Vat by the person who had erected it. His name was Gajayan and he was the son of a person, Parasari. And it says that this site is being erected in connection with the deities Sankarshan and Vasudev. The inscription is in Sanskrit and it has been assigned to a period almost the same as the Besnagar inscription. So, this is again, D.R. Bhandarkar says that this site continued to be in worship till about the 7th century. So, these are early evidences that we have of Vasudev Krishna worship. One is from Besnagar and the other is from Nagri in near Chittor. And now to come to Mathura. Here also, despite the fact that Mathura was attacked, invaded so many times, it is fascinating how we can still reconstruct at least part of that history on the basis of fragments of inscriptions. The first evidence that we have is the Vasu Dorjam inscription. It is dated to the time of the Shaka ruler Mahashatrap Sodas, and who was ruling in Mathura around 15 Common Era. So it is the first decade of the Common Era. And this Dorjam, it is donated by a person whose name is Vasu, and it is donated for a temple of Vasudev. So that inscription is there, a fragment of that inscription, and it says that I'm creating this building with a beautiful doorway and a courtyard and a great place for Bhagavad Vasudev. And may Vasudev be pleased. This is what the inscription says. So this is the first evidence that we have from Mathura. And even more interesting is the second inscription, which was found by Alexander Cunningham. It was found from a village, Mora, near Mathura. And this inscription is also very clear. It records the installation of 5 beautiful stone images of the holy 5 Vrishnis in a stone temple which is built. It gives the details. So it says 5 beautiful stone images of the holy 5 Vrishni Veeras. Now, how do we know that these Vrishni Veeras are actually members of Vasudev Krishna's family? For example, the Vayu Puran, in the opening verse of chapter 97 identifies them as Sankarshan, Vasudev, Pradyumna, Sambha, Anirudh, and these are all relations of Vasudev Krishna. Now, in 1911, excavations near the site where Alexander found that inscription, two male torsos were excavated. They were found. They were just the torso. There was no inscription. The head was missing, and just the torso was there. And scholars calculated that these two torsos belong to that temple which was associated with the Mora well inscription. And they say that because they were so close to that Mora well inscription, they were in all likelihood two of the five members of Vasudev Krishna's family whose images had been installed there as per the inscription. And sometime later, in subsequent excavations, a fragment of a pedestal was found with the feet of a woman. And scholars who are specialists on this history of this area, they say that it is likely that it represented the sister of Vasudev Krishna and Balram. The thing is that this fragment of an inscription that has survived mentions the name Kanishk. So it is erected 100 years after the male torsos. Why it was erected 100 years after the male torsos is something that we have no answer for. And just in case you think that the worship of Vasudev Krishna was confined to this North India area, there's a very, very important epigraph. In fact, it is regarded as the most significant epigraph found in Western India. And this comes from a place, Nana Ghat. It is a mountainous pass in the Western Ghats. And there we have this Nana Ghat cave inscription. It is an inscription by a queen. Her name is Naganika. She seems to have been a Naga lady, married to the Satvana king, Satkarni I. Now, this family, was renowned for its the yagyas that it did, Vedic yagyas that it did, and it was also a great patron of Buddhism. And the inscription starts by invoking Vasudev and Sankarshan. So this is an inscription that has been found. It is also dated to the first half of the 2nd century BC. So these are very, very interesting evidence that we have found. And just to go back, at Karakoram, on the Gilgit-Baltistan area, there is a rock, and that rock has representations of two male figures and an inscription. That inscription says Rama Krishna. Rama is Balram and Krishna is Krishna, and it has been dated to the first half of the 1st century by Dhani, the well-known Pakistani archaeologist. And finally, I would like to mention a very important coin that was found by Alexander Cunningham. It is a Vrishni coin, silver coin, and it mentions the Vrishni community. And John Allen, who interpreted that coin, he says that it was, the legend on that coin says, protector or warrior of the Vrishni tribe. And he said this coin dates back to the 1st century Common Era. So this is the first part of my talk today, in which I discuss the antiquity of image worship and how it has survived, and the earliest evidence that we have of it. And despite all the political developments, the turbulence, this tradition of image worship continues to remain dominant and strong till today.
Parichay is asking, how did Radha Krishna imagery evolved in comparison with Krishna, with his wives like Rukmini and Satyabhama. So we have Krishna with Rukmini and Satyabhama, which is older, of course. And then we have Radha Krishna imagery. He would like to understand how this gets connected together. What happens?
See, the thing is that as far as what I have studied so far, Radha comes into the picture very, very late. There is no mention of Radha for a long time. So I do not know how I can answer this question, because right now the period that I have studied, Radha does not come across as a major figure at all. Yes. In the ancient period. She is not mentioned also in most texts.
Thank you. Then Amita Sinha, Professor Amita Sinha was with us as a scholar in residence, and she is an expert on geography and heritage and the whole interconnection between the two. So she is asking, and if you open the chat, you will be able to read yourself, Meenakshi. If you click on at the top right, click on chat. Yes. You should, and then you scroll down, and you will see the question. So Amita Sinha is asking, thank you for a very interesting lecture. Your work on Ayodhya is fascinating, and I happen to know that she has used your work.
Thank you so much.
What is the earliest record of Rama being deified?
What is the earliest record of Ram being deified? Yes. I can give you sculptural evidence. So sculptural, and then we can go on to other forms. There is a sculpture that is before Common Era of Ram, of a scene from the Ramayana. So that means that Ramayana was popular because people were making terracottas of scenes of the Ramayana. But we have a terracotta of Ram. And how do we know it is a terracotta of Ram? Because the word Ram is written on his dress. That is early Common Era. Now, in the 4th, 5th century, when temples begin to be made, because that is the way we can answer this question, we have small temples being made, but scenes from the Ramayana being engraved on those temples. And this tradition continues. So you will find many temples, like the most important is the temple at Deogarh, which was built by the Gupta kings. It is a beautiful temple, and it has beautiful statues, whatever has survived, from all phases of Ram's life. So the earliest depictions are before the Deogarh temple, where scenes from the Ramayana are engraved on temple walls. Now, what happens in the 12th century? In the 12th century, large temples begin to be made for the first time in northern India. Because before that, if you look at the Deogarh temple, the temples are small. If you look at the South, the Shore temple, it's not a huge temple. In the 12th century, temples only exclusively in honor of Lord Ram are made. Because otherwise in temples you will have, all manner of deities. You will find sculptures of them in every temple. It's not that in a Vishnu or a Shiv temple you only find Shiv, you will find many other things. So in the 12th century, large, huge temples are made. And the interesting thing is that the inscriptions that are there in those temples give the details of Lord Ram, his life, and why it is being made in honor of Lord Ram. And I just want to add one thing, that, we have epigraphic evidence from early on where kings of India, in their inscriptions, they say they are like Ram. So early on, we have a lot of Kalidas's works. So it's a little difficult to say when he is, but it is very early in our history. In fact, there are references to public staging of scenes from Ramayana as early as the 1st, 2nd century Common Era. So why would there be scenes, staging of scenes from the Ramayana unless the principal people in the Ramayana were not revered?
Thank
So
you.
it's a-
Thank you, Meenakshi. That is quite clear. So I think you have answered the question very precisely. We have quite a lot of others. Ritvik is asking, how about ancient Shiva worship? Because you have spoken of
Yes.
Vasudeva
Now,
Krishna, you have spoken of Rama. What about Shiva? How would you date it, and from where does it arise?
it's a very, very brilliant question. And I'm very happy to share what little I know about it. Shiva is mostly worshipped not as a statue or an image, but as a linga. Even today, in most Shiva temples, it is the Shiv Ling that we worship, not the Shiv Murti. And Michelle would know that in the period of the Indus Valley Harappan civilization itself, we have found Shivlings. And you have shown photographs of that in your book, The Lost River. So Shivling, we have evidence of it from the time of Harappan Indus civilization. In situ Shivlings have been found over there. And 3 are well documented. And it is, I cannot explain this, but even today, if you go to, like, for example, the Brihadeshwar temple, Shiv is mostly worshipped as Shivling. And there are images of his in every temple of Shiva, but they are not the main Murti. Thank you so much.